Rosalind, thank you so much for having a conversation with me.
Pleasure to be here.
So you are at MIT, where you are the founder and director of the Affective Computing Research Group.
That's right.
So why don't you tell me about what affective computing is?
Yeah. Affective computing is computing that relates to, arises from, or deliberately influences emotion. We've been inventing different kinds of technology to help people measure and communicate affective information. Things like if a person is interested or bored, pleased or displeased, engaged or disengaged.
So what does it mean for a technology to read emotions in a human being? Give me give me an example both of what the technology does and how people use it.
Yes, one example is when people are using a computer and it has a built-in camera. If they choose to opt in, they can turn on the camera and have it watch them watching other content. And through that, you can communicate with your face things like where some content made you laugh, where you actually look like you were interested in what the video was saying, or where in a lot of political videos we found people smirk.
People watching political videos?
They do a lot of smirking. Yeah, we originally were looking for smiles and frowns, and then we realized a lot of the most interesting facial expressions were skepticism.
I'm afraid, I'm someone who does a certain amount of cable television where you're talking about politics, and when other people are talking, I'm always afraid that my face is lapsing into some sort of unpleasantly skeptical expression, and it sounds like it probably is.
There are people who are leaky, who express pretty much outwardly what they're feeling inwardly, and then there are people who may choose not to express that. We're all free to hide it. We also make...
Are we free to hide it? I mean, can people... How effective are people at controlling their facial emotions? Or their facial expression of emotion?
There's a great variety of ability there. There are some people who are not effective at all, and there are others who have a great poker face.
And do you do tests where you ask people to control their emotions while they're...
I do not focus on people's cases where they're trying to hide emotions. I usually focus on cases where people want to communicate and maybe they're being misunderstood. We've chosen to focus the technology on cases where we can see a clear usage where it can help people. And usually that's not trying to extract things from people who want to hide it.
Right, okay. So you're not giving it to interrogation artists and so on.
We are not. There are uses like that for some of our technology.
So your uses. So tell me about the uses then. What are the applications that essentially help people who aren't being understood? How does that work?
Well, one of them has actually evolved from. I'm wearing some unusual wristbands here that have. We started working with people who had limited language abilities, especially people on the autism spectrum. But all of us at some point were unable to speak, or we may become sick and unable to speak. And we realized many of these individuals were experiencing a lot of stress and feelings that were being misinterpreted based on how people viewed them on the outside. And by putting on a sensor that could measure more of what was going on inside them, we could communicate to the observer that the child was actually, maybe he looked mellow laying on the floor like he was just being a lazy bum, but in fact, he's so stressed that if you bother him right now, he might become injurious to himself or others. Whereas if you let him, get the comfort of the deep pressure of the floor, maybe that's the best thing for him right now and he'll calm down.
So what kind of things are being measured then in that situation by the wristbands?
Right, so this one is measuring a thing called skin conductance. It's an electrical change in the skin it's generated when you sweat, but it's also generated very subtly by changes in the deep emotion centers of your brain, especially the parts that get activated with fight or flight. When something makes you anxious, or you might feel like it really matters a lot and it's not under your control, so it's kind of mildly threatening or majorly threatening, those things can activate these regions in the brain, which sends signals to your pseudomotor nerve system, which can cause you to sweat, but even before you sweat, it can cause electrical changes that we sense.
Interesting. And so this is, in a sense, these are forms of wearable computing.
Exactly.
Right?
These are examples of wearable computing.
And I know that some of your work, it's not just autism, you've done work related to depression as well. And so how does that, because I think people think of depression as such an inward, interior state. And I'm wondering both sort of how, or if you sort of are trying to measure it, what kind of measurements you use, but then also what are the applications of your work for either people struggling with depression or people trying to help them?
Right, we're doing a lot of fundamental research on what the body's changes are during depression right now, both before a person becomes depressed and after. We have projects on both. One of the things that led us to that work, I mean, originally I thought was, oh, you're depressed, you're just not moving much, or you're just not very emotionally activated. And some of it is a suppression of expression and a suppression of activity. But also we've learned there can be imbalances deep in the brain. And now we are doing some basic studies as to how those show up in some of the signals we measure in different parts of the body. One of the biggest surprises we found was when one of our non-speaking children was having a signal that was huge on one side and not the other. And I couldn't figure out what caused that. Like, how could you be emotionally excited on one side and not the other? Like, I thought our sensors were broken. And after debugging everything and realizing it wasn't the sensors, I learned that the child had just had a grand mal seizure, and that explained what was going on. And then we started to learn about seizures being little bursts of electrical activity in different parts of the brain. Sometimes they spread to the whole brain. But when they're localized, they can send signals that show up in only one part of the body. And as we traced that down, we learned that certain regions, when overactivated or underactivated, could show up as things like your right side being aroused and your left side not. And that now is, those findings are being used to build seizure detectors and also to issue alerts that could help people prevent dangerous states from going unattended. And also we're looking at early signs of depression, and also as people get treatment and start to heal and come out of depression, do these patterns shift to more normal patterns?
So both people who are already patients and people who are, I guess, in at-risk populations would wear these devices, basically, in the long run, as sort of monitoring for themselves or their doctors? Is that...
Right. In fact, this is a slightly
Are you
one.
actually, is
yeah,
that
yeah.
is
And
hooked
this
up
one
and...
also doubles as a wristwatch. This is the impact.
I was going to say, it's the Apple, it's the Apple Watch.
I think it looks better than the Apple Watch.
So much better.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wouldn't expect that it's cheaper, but maybe...
it is less expensive than the Apple Watch.
It is? Well,
yes.
then your technology must be well on its way. So
we're working on it.
That's great.
Yeah, this is a prototype.